What was Budanov's last major operation as the head of the main intelligence directorate? Spoiler alert, friends. A truck packed with Russian soldiers was completely destroyed and burned to ashes in Nakrin, Kuban. What does Budanov's appointment as the head of the president's office mean now? Is this a strengthening of the military cabinet? Is this preparation of a successor for Zelensky? Or could it be the first step toward tough compromises in negotiations? Or maybe on the contrary? We will be figuring all of this out in this episode. But first, please subscribe to this YouTube channel, friends. Don't forget to like and leave your comments. Well, so as not to waste your time, I'll get started. So today, as is known, Budanov is the new head of the president's office. But before leaving his post at the main intelligence directorate, Kyrylo Oleksievich carried out, well, probably his last operation. And he carried it out brilliantly. How did it happen? December 26, 2025, the city of Korenovsk, Krasnodar Krai. Around 7:40 in the morning, bam! A powerful explosion at the entrance to the location of the 47th Missile Brigade of the Russian Army. What was the target? A military KAMAZ truck transporting personnel. The result is simply incredible, friends. The vehicle was engulfed in flames. Russian soldiers burned alive in droves and suffered colossal losses. The main intelligence directorate reported this clearly and directly. Look, this brigade is involved in missile strikes on peaceful Ukrainian cities. And for every crime, there will be retribution. The operation is precise, demonstrative, and carries a very vivid and direct message. Our forces can reach the enemy deep behind their lines. Anywhere at all. This is a calling card, right? This is the hallmark of the work of the main intelligence directorate, specifically under Budanov's leadership, friends. And just look at that explosion. It was in this truck that Russian soldiers, criminals burned alive. But friends, it seems that such an operation might actually be one of his last in this position. Why? Well, because just a week after New Year's, there was, not even a week, just a few days after New Year's, there was an unexpected personnel change. And it turned out that on January 2nd, already in the new 2026, a decree appeared on the president's website. The head of the GUR, Kyrylo Budanov, is appointed as the head of the president's office. This is one of the most influential administrative positions in the country. Budanov himself responded rather quickly. Listen to what he said next. He says the following: I consider the position of head of the president's office as another frontier of responsibility to the country. For me, it is an honor and a responsibility. The focus is on strategic security. And even from this brief comment, it's clear that this isn't just a bureaucratic reshuffle. It's a shift in focus from tactical special operations to strategic governance of the state. At the most critical moment, Western media understood this clearly and began actively analyzing it. I've prepared a review of the global media for you, friends. Let's go through the main points. What are the world's media saying about Budanov? First, the end of the Yermak era and a change in format. Reuters immediately emphasizes this. This is a significant change. For the first time, the position will be held not by a civilian politician, but by a combat officer, a war veteran. This is a signal that security is the priority. The face of Ukrainian resistance. That's exactly how the Associated Press describes it. And let me remind you, it was Budanov who was the main voice, who constantly, he warned about Russia's intentions. He made the group synonymous with daring operations far behind enemy lines. The Financial Times writes about his popularity and the political risks. The publications Politico and Financial Times also highlight another aspect: Budanov's incredible popularity in Ukraine. He regularly enjoyed high trust ratings, and this raises the main question, as these journalists write. Is President Zelensky perhaps preparing a successor for himself? Or on the contrary, is he trying, so to speak, to tame his main rival by putting him in a hot administrative seat that often burns reputations? The key to Washington is probably the most important topic for Western analysts, because the New York Times and the Washington Post write about it directly. Budanov has close ties, developed over years, with American intelligence, particularly with the CIA. He has good relations with both Democrats and Republicans. And this makes him the ideal translator between Kiev and the new Trump administration. Well, new. It's already been 9 months, and we still keep calling it new. It'll be a year soon, right? Yes, it'll be a year already, really, on January 6th. And we still keep saying new. It's a new administration. In short, Budanov is the translator, right? Budanov is the liaison, so to speak. Moreover, former American officials describe him not as a hawk, but as a realist and a restrained negotiator, unlike what they see as the more confrontational style of Yermak. This gives hope for a constructive dialogue, write journalists from the New York Times and the Washington Post. Next, the Wall Street Journal writes about the mission, about peace and stability. The journalist described the task, saying that Budanov is supposed to work on ensuring American support in the peace process, coordinating efforts with the chief negotiator Rustem Umerov. So the West sees Budanov as follows. First, as a symbolic figure representing the transition to a military chain of command. Second, as a potential rival to Zelensky. Third, and most importantly, as the main, so to speak, liaison, a connector with the United States for the toughest negotiations ahead. But what do people inside Ukraine think? Here, in fact, there are a lot of opinions, friends, so I decided to focus on three of them, let's say the most popular ones, right? Well, let's put it this way, on three opinions that embody the most popular views. The publication Deutsche Welle, citing our Ukrainian experts, writes the following. Let's start with the political subtext. They quote Ihor Reiterovich, our political expert, who says that with this move, the president is neutralizing a potential competitor. Even if it's a presidential candidate, you need to keep them close, says Reiterovich. However, he also believes that Budanov will be entrusted with the main task of conducting dialogue with the Americans because he can explain Ukraine's situation convincingly and with evidence in hand, and even use successful operations as a trump card. Successful operations behind enemy lines in the Russian Federation. But there is another view, and it is more dramatic. Mr. Volodymyr Horbach believes that in recent months, Budanov is no longer a hawk. Supposedly, his rhetoric indicates a readiness for tough compromises. Well, maybe there is something to these words. And this, they say, is exactly what is needed to Zelensky. And why? Because according to this version, the president is choosing the so-called Trump scenario, ending the war through concessions. And who is better suited to sell such a painful, let's be honest, compromise to Ukrainians? Not a politician, but a military hero, the national hero Budanov. Moreover, Horbach himself does not rule out that Zelensky might not run in the elections at all, but instead prepare Budanov as his successor. In fact, there are a lot of such theories. These are two fundamentally different opinions. But what does the third expert say, in our case, in particular, Volodymyr Fesenko? He looks at this whole story practically and says that for Zelensky, this is a very strong move because he gets a hero on his team with a positive reputation. But for Budanov's own political future, this is a very big risk. Why? No one, after holding this position, has made a successful political career in Ukraine, says Fesenko. And that's true. I mean, if you really think about it, no one, well, maybe Litvin, when he was twice the speaker after serving as the head of the president's office. But, well, you know yourself what kind of reputation Litvin has, and thanks to what and whom that even became possible. Litvin's appointment to the position, Speaker of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. I don't even want to mention Gongadze here. I don't want to talk about the various coalitions. I don't want to bring up who switched sides with the Party of Regions or who was in which coalition. All of that is already clear enough. Today we're talking about Budanov. So in that case, what do we have left at the end of the day, friends? Relying solely on the experts I quoted today, let's discuss Budanov's role. First of all, the war is already ongoing. And secondly, now it might take on a new quality, so to speak, and be coordinated with the president's office. In other words, this is a centralization of management. Budanov is a military man. He heads the office. There are different services that operate autonomously, and I think it's very good that they operate autonomously. There is competition between them. Now, perhaps Budanov will coordinate all of this. I don't know, but that's the opinion that was voiced today. For peace, Budanov is now a key figure in potential negotiations. Here, I absolutely agree, though there is something I don't agree with the idea that his appointment is a clear signal to Washington about Kyiv's readiness for a serious, realistic dialogue, possibly even about painful compromises. His authority as a hawk who has become a realist is the main asset in this process. I don't quite see it that way. In my view, it's actually the opposite. Budanov's appointment is precisely a signal that there will be no concessions, that the opposition will become even tougher and, by the way, more pragmatic at the same time. But Budanov's contacts are the key to conveying everything correctly to our partners. That's what I think about it. In other words, you need someone who is respected by Americans, who has authority among Americans, and who has a good head on their shoulders. Someone who can convey to them all the information, the advantages of Ukraine and Russia, and so on and so forth. Budanov is simply the ideal candidate. For politics, Zelensky has performed a brilliant or conversely, a very risky political maneuver. He has either tamed his main rival, well, if you can even consider Budanov his main rival, which I personally don't, or he has prepared him to transfer power in case he himself steps down. Or perhaps both at the same time. Time will tell. The most important question remains, friends, can Budanov, the intelligence officer who delivered strikes, become Budanov, the diplomat who will find the words for peace? And will he be able to survive in the political arena? Battles without weapons, where the position of head of the president's office often becomes a political graveyard? Let's call things by their real names. Thank you, friends. Stay tuned to this channel. Please subscribe more actively. Take care of yourselves, and see you next time.